on the channel and some breaking news, as we always do, things that happen here today. Because I know all of you don't get to watch every show, even though we'd like you to. But we want to make sure you don't miss the really important things. And so we're going to give you kind of some of the highlights, some of the big hits from the week, as well as some things you didn't see. And I'm going to actually start off with something that you didn't see just from last night. We had Larry Johnson on earlier this afternoon. I highly recommend you go back and watch that show. It's posted on our website there. I mean, on our YouTube homepage. But one thing we didn't get to cover in there from the debate last night was something that President Biden said, what I found a little bit problematic. I'll just say, here's what he said at the debate.
The idea that somehow we are this failing country. I never heard a president talk like this before. We're the envy of the world. Name me a single major country president who wouldn't trade places with the United States of America for all our problems and all our opportunities. We're the most progressive country in the world in getting things done. We're the strongest country in the world. We're a country in the world who keeps our word, and everybody trusts us. All of our allies and our those who he coddles up to, from Kim Jong-un, who he sends love letters to, and Putin, etc. They don't want to screw around with us.
Yeah, about that we're the most powerful nation in the world, that everybody trusts us, that we keep our word, and nobody wants to screw with us. That's from 1991, folks. That's the world that really existed at the end of Desert Storm, when we were the preeminent military power on the planet. Nobody, not the defunct Soviet Union, not the just barely emerging China, nobody was a threat to the United States, and no one could really withstand us. So all the things he said there were true in 1991, and therein really raises a lot of the problems of our current situation here, is that he still acts like it's 1991. He still makes actions, and I think actually believes the things that he's saying there. And that you can understand, if you have a belief in a worldview that existed decades earlier, like nearly 3 decades now, full decades, more than 3 decades now, but you're looking at the world that exists right now, where you very much have a very powerful and risen China, no longer just a rising China, but a risen China. And they are at the very least a near peer, and economically bigger than virtually everybody else in the world except us. And pretty soon will probably overtake us, or at least meet us. Then, of course, you have the the Russians. And now then, because of their alliance with Iran, apparently they have a new deal that we're still waiting on the details from. They definitely had one with North Korea that are now military in nature. Also some other deals with Vietnam and several other nations. So they are no longer this powerless entity that they were before. And now, as a result of this 2.5 years of war, they're militarily, conventionally stronger than they were on February 2022, when the war against Ukraine started. Many people in the United States have bent over backwards to tell you how, oh, this is weakening Russia. That's one of our objectives, etc. And you see that the evidence on the ground, if you've spent any time watching our show, we detailed and diagrammed all the ways that Russia is much stronger than they were. And in terms of military power, probably stronger than most of the European nations, probably most of the, at least individually, more than the NATO nations. But because there is certainly that nuclear card, NATO has nuclear weapons, Russia has nuclear weapons. So a lot of that stuff is balanced out. And the idea that Russia is going to attack into NATO, which President Biden also says the debate last night, is complete nonsense. So there's every reason why we could get into a negotiated settlement and should get into one, where we need to get into one. More on that later in the show here. But in terms of what he said about, nobody wants to screw with us. Well, earlier this week, we had John Mearsheimer on, who had a different take on that.
The pressure here for us to do something militarily with Iran is going to grow with the passage of time. And there's a danger we'll get sucked into this war with Hezbollah. And we're already in a fight with the Houthis. So you then ask the question, is what we can do to avoid a war with Iran, to avoid a war with Hezbollah, to shut down the war with the Houthis, and to shut down the war with Hamas. There's only one way to solve this problem, and that's to get the Israelis to fundamentally alter their foreign policy, because it is the war in Gaza that is the taproot of all these problems, except for the Iran nuclear problem. And if you want to avoid a war with Hezbollah, and you want to shut down the war with the Houthis, and you want to shut down the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, you have to figure out how to solve the problem in Gaza and the West Bank, by the way. And that involves us getting involved and putting pressure on the Israelis to change their policies towards the Palestinians, which are, of course, remarkably foolish, and adopt a smart policy. But the fact is, Danny, we cannot do that. We cannot put any meaningful pressure on the Israelis, in large part because of the power of the Israel lobby in the United States. All of this is a way of saying we're screwed.
Yeah, ouch. Really hard to add much to that, or not a lot of explanation necessary on why he reaches that conclusion. Because if we can't even, convince or even cajole our allies about what we want them to do in ways that are antithetical to our interests, and it's not really a good idea, or no one should really expect us to be able to cajole or convince our adversaries to do things that are at our benefit. And in fact, we also recently had on Doug Macgregor, who looked at this from a little bit different point of view and said, hey, part of our problem is we're not willing to look at what the other side wants, whether you like them or not, whether you agree with them or not. If you don't even know what they're looking for, then how are you going to find a solution?
I think the Russians would like to end this by the end of September. And if you're going to try and end this conflict before the end of September, you've got to cross the river. We've been lied to so much about the Russians. We don't understand the rationality behind their behavior. The last thing that Vladimir Putin wants to do is rule Ukrainians. The areas that he's got control of right now are overwhelmingly Russified or Russian. He's not interested in ruling Ukrainians. He wants the Ukrainians to rule themselves. He just wants them to be neutral and not present a threat to Russia. And that's why he's really trying to create something on the model of the Austrian State Treaty, because the Austrian State Treaty worked. He'd like to see that work in Ukraine as well. And the Europeans are the ones, along with us, that have steadfastly refused that solution, very stupidly. But he knows he's not going to get that right away. Then the other thing is his patience has paid off. Everybody that wanted him, and I was one of them, that thought, the biggest mistake you can make is not to decisively attack, launch the offensive, and end this thing. But he was smarter, and he said, no, we don't need to do that. As long as these Ukrainians will impale themselves on our defenses, let them do it. Well, that's over. Now he's moving incrementally and deliberately towards the West. He's invited as many remaining Ukrainian forces as exist that can fight to concentrate in front of his forces near Kharkov. That's happened. Ukrainians just don't have much left. So he can move decisively, but he's still saying, let's wait and see what happens with these governments. And the question is, does he move now or does he move a little later based upon the potential for some of these governments to collapse? Macron's in a lot of trouble. The French government can absolutely change dramatically, but so can the government in Berlin. And he really, really wants to watch what the Germans do. And I'm telling you, the German people are not going to fight Russia and Ukraine. They don't want anything to do with it. And there are large numbers of Germans in the electorate who are saying it's time to drop this fiction. It's time to stop listening to Washington. It's time to start acting in the interests of the German nation. And that's something that Scholz has not done.
And it remains to be seen, how long that's going to have to happen. With the show we did, I believe, a couple of weeks back with Jacques Beau, talking about how the European elections have continued to shift in thinking within Europe, not just on foreign policy, but that is one of the major issues about support for the war within the Ukrainian, within the European nations. And there's obviously a lot of cooling of enthusiasm on that as they see the economic consequence it's having to Europeans. They see the issue with a lot of these millions of refugees from Ukraine now straining some of their infrastructure within each of the nations where they're trying to give them humanitarian assistance now over years of time. No one knows for sure when that's going to end. Many of them are probably never going back. Lots of also other issues on agricultural issues and other farming products that Ukraine is trying to, since they can't get everything out through the Black Sea, they're trying to get it into Europe and different markets, which is causing problems with some of the European markets and a lot of anger at some of the European farmers and ranchers and all that kind of stuff. So you're having lots of internal problems in there. We've already talked about how you have Hungary, Slovakia, and some of the other nations of Western Europe that are outright opposition to what NATO wants to do. Hungary just absolutely opted out of what NATO's doing within Ukraine. And I doubt that they're going to be the last ones on that boat, especially as they see more and more the fiction of what so many of our leaders tell us, that the war is winning, that we're in a right direction, that eventually we're going to succeed. All of those things are now, falling on deaf ears. And I think that the more time goes on, you're going to see a bigger shift. Now, in terms of what happened in the U.S. In the debate last night for the U.S. presidency and the performance of both Trump and Biden, I think you're going to see an acceleration of that. And it's, as we're talking today, still very unclear what's going to happen with the U.S. race, whether President Biden is even going to stay in office, whether he's going to stay in the race, whether he's going to try to make it all the way through to January. There's so much uncertainty right now, and all of that is having an impact on the war, which we're going to see in a minute. I want to show you something in a second that's probably really strongly related to that. But first of all, I want to look at something which I think is an even more important something to look at first, and that is the consequence to what happens if some of the things that Colonel Macgregor there talked about that we should do, i.e. find a negotiated settlement in the war, because if we push too hard, if we keep striking into Russia and Russia ends up striking back out, more on that in a minute as well, then you have the risk that this war escalates, and in a worst case scenario, which is no longer some fantasy situation, advances into the nuclear realm. And we had MIT professor Ted Postol on this week to explain to us pretty graphically for me, because he said, here's what would happen to your hometown where you live right now if things go sideways.
Let's go back to slide 14 and show what one of these warheads could do to Washington, keeping in mind that with a single missile of this kind, it would probably be detonated at a relatively high altitude off the ground, as shown in this image. And if we go to the next slide, you would produce what's called a fireball. Shows you 1 second after the detonation of this weapon, which is off the ground. The fireball is produced by the enormous temperatures produced by the nuclear weapon when its energy is released, which happens in a few millionths of seconds. So that happens very fast. The weapon is so hot that it radiates into the air around it as X-rays. X-rays are totally absorbed by air. The air is not transparent to the X-rays. So it initially heats the air to maybe 1,000,000 degrees Kelvin.
So, yeah, I mean, that speaks for itself. I don't even need to add any commentary on that. And that's just Washington, D.C. Obviously, targets in Ukraine could precede that, or other of our Western allies. London seems to be a favorite target, at least to talk about among the Russian side. Not a good thing for any of us, and we shouldn't even be playing with that. Now, I said a second ago that Zelensky may be kind of changing his tune, perhaps based on what some are telling him, where the U.S. election is going, and he may have had some information ahead of the time of the debate last night that we suspect could tell him that his time is running out, that the game is about over, that the reality is about to poke in, and that things are not going to go the way that he wants to. This is starkly shown when I believe it was April 28th, he came out and made a statement, very brash, very bold, very confident, that he was going to set up something for the next 10 years with the United States.
Our teams, Ukraine and the United States, are currently working on a bilateral security agreement, and we are already working on a specific text. We are discussing the specific foundations of our security and cooperation. We are also working on fixing specific levels of support for this year and for the next 10 years.
For the next 10 years. Now, as you know, because we covered it, and I think it was last week, he got that 10-year agreement. He got that bilateral agreement, I think just associated with the G7 meeting, or when Biden was in town or in Europe for some other meeting. They actually got together. They had this big signing ceremony. Biden said, yep, 10 years. We got this long-term agreement. We're going to keep giving them everything that they want. So you'd think you'd think Zelensky would be happy. You think he'd be more confident. It's allegedly getting close to the time when F-16s are going to start entering the fray. They have the ATACMS missiles. So you'd think he's going to be even more boisterous than he was before. But then Yesterday, a very strange change of tune came from him.
We don't have too much time because we have a lot of wounded and dead people on the battlefield and through civilians. That's why we don't want to have this war during years.
So you see, there is no confidence on his face in there. We talk about body language all the time, and you can see the sharp contrast between his April appearance and the one yesterday, and you definitely see a big change in his message there. And given that all these things had preceded it, one would not expect that unless he was given some information behind the scenes. And look, there's other things that may also be factoring into his condition there, and the fact that they are having a horrible time, desperately difficult to mobilize enough people to be able to even offset losses. By some of the reports coming out there, they're mobilizing about 5,000 people a month. And we've shown several of the videos here. You've probably seen them on your own and Elsewhere. That even to get those 5,000, they're literally grabbing them off the street. They're grabbing them out of stores. They're going into some nightclubs that I've seen, some bars. I mean, just anywhere. A lot of the men are even afraid to go on the street. This is absolutely widespread in many parts of Ukraine because when they go out, they end up getting captured. And then thrown in. And you can just understand when you get that kind of personnel and they end up going into uniform and they get thrown to the front lines. There's some more of them right there. These are very recent. Just imagine, just look at that guy right there that's being thrown in that van. How eager do you think he's going to be to fight when he gets to the front line? He's going to be terrified. I mean, he's obviously trying to resist right now because everybody in Ukraine, especially the men, understand that they're just being thrown into a slaughterhouse. That everything they've been promised from say the latter part of 2022 all the way forward. Zelensky kept promising that they were going to have a victory, that they were going to drive Russia out, first of all, to the Azov coast, and then they were going to push them back to the 1991 borders. All of these promises he kept making, none of them turned out to be true. And now then, since that offensive in 2023 completely failed to even really get hardly past the start point, now then they're methodically being pushed back in the west and in the north. And there's lots of reports of large Russian formations that are in the north that could mass and come down at any point. No one knows for sure where or what, or even if they're going to do that for the time being. But what we know for sure is that they're being pushed methodically all across the line of contact. They're suffering casualties daily in relatively large numbers, sometimes big spikes in large numbers, and they're not being able to supply them. So that may be part of what he said about we're dying because they're not having enough people. And if you don't have enough people, folks, as I keep saying over and over to anyone who will listen, wars are ultimately about men, not machines, not money. You can't fight without machines and money, but without the men, none of the other stuff matters. You can get everything. You can get, like Larry Johnson said earlier on our show, you could get 1,000 armored vehicles of various types, but if you don't have anybody to operate them, what good is it going to do? And I would add, if you don't have trained people to fight them, what are you going to do? Well, what you should do, and what Colonel Macgregor had suggested, what others we've had on our show suggested, many of them, is that you need to seek a negotiated settlement. Now, as I have articulated here many times in the past, there were off-ramps many times. There were in 2021, there was several off-ramps possible, none of which we took. There were offers of a negotiated settlement to where basically Ukraine would be an independent entity. No one would have gone to war with them. They would have even had nominal control even over the Donbass. Crimea was never on the table, but they could have done that in the past. Those were taken off the table. Those were ignored. Then comes the war. More opportunities for peace were given. All of them were rejected because U.S. keeps saying, we're going to support you as long as possible, as long as it takes, no matter what. We're going to keep giving you all these things. Now, all of a sudden, it looks like something's going to be different. And so here on what could be the cusp of another major Russian offensive in the summer, you have Vladimir Putin, who said a week or so ago, a little over a week now, that there is one more chance for a peace offering that he's got on the table.
The essence of our proposal is not some kind of temporary truce or suspension of fire, as, for example, the West wants. This is not about freezing the conflict, but about its final completion. And I will say again, as soon as Kiev agrees to a similar course of events proposed today, agrees to the complete withdrawal of its troops from the DPR and LPR in the Zaporozhye and Kherson regions, and really begins this process, we are ready to begin negotiations without delaying them. I repeat, this is our principled position. Neutral, non-aligned, nuclear-free status of Ukraine, its demilitarization and denazification.
Now, on top of that, you had, I believe it was either earlier today or late last night. I'm not sure when it actually was published, but the new Minister of Defense published a pretty strong and authoritative statement that should get the eyes of every American, and certainly of American leaders. The Russian defense minister instructed his general staff of the Russian armed forces to, quote, take prompt response measures, end quote, to the flights of American drones over the Black Sea. He noted the increased intensity of flights of U.S. strategic unmanned aerial vehicles over the Black Sea, which carry out reconnaissance and targeting designation of high-precision weapons. And he's referring there to the attack over Sevastopol last week that killed a lot of Russian vacationers on the beach in the southern part of Crimea. And as we've reported several times, many Russian officials have said there will be consequences this time. It's not just going to be a warning of you better not or else, but this time expressly said there will be consequences. Now then here, shortly following this new Minister of Defense Belousov's conversation with U.S. Secretary of Defense Austin just a few days back, one can imagine this was on the agenda that was talked about there, though not publicly acknowledged. Now then you see, really they're setting the stage for, if you keep flying Global Hawks and anything else in the Black Sea, which are used to bring targeting information for American weapons, Western weapons, onto the Russian locations in the Crimea, they're going to be shot down. We'll see if that happens. Again, it hasn't happened yet, but the stage is certainly being set. And then the question is going to be, then what? Then what's the United States going to do? And that's part of our dilemma here. And again, we have to tie it back into potentially what happened at that debate last night. Because if Russia views the U.S. administration as being weak and uncertain, and now they're wobbling around, then they may not be willing to take decisive action in response. And so it might be the threshold for actually shooting down some of these unmanned vehicles may be now lower. So if we are concerned about that and in fact take action to not send the drones up there so they don't get shot down, then of course now then we're losing intelligence capabilities, intelligence gathering, targeting abilities. So now it's going to be much more difficult to fire some of our weapons into that location, and we'll see what that does. But then again, the other side is if you fire them into the area, if you launch those vehicles, those are multi-million-dollar platforms, and there's not that many of them. And if they get shot down, then what are you going to do? So you could see that it's very possible that Putin has got to the point to where he's saying, I'm willing to call your bluff, and I am willing to shoot these things down. And then what are you going to do? And that's where we get into the whole issue of risk escalation possibilities, which I am very concerned about. And all I want to see this war end. This is why I'm so emphatic that it's in everybody's interest, the Ukrainians' interest first and foremost, so they can end the dying of a war that cannot be won, but also all of Europe and the United States. It is in all of our interest to get this war knocked out as soon as possible so we don't run into any chance that we find out what Putin is or is not willing to do. All right, shifting gears here a little bit. I want to look at, we had Jeffrey Sachs on this week, and he was talking about the leadership, and this is before the debate, so maybe even a little more strong now, but he was talking about how there is a solution to the war in the Middle East if there is strong leadership in the United States primarily, but unfortunately, the way he views it, there's not.
Every day that Netanyahu is calling the shots and mowing the lawn in Gaza and planning for an incursion in Lebanon, he puts Israel at greater and greater risk. So he's doing a profound disservice to Israel, profound, worst prime minister by far in their history. And the president of the United States has a job to stop this. He needs to pick up the phone and say to Netanyahu, sorry, you're on your own if you do this. And then it stops that way as well. But boy, can we count on that? No way we can count on that, because we have been in ongoing escalation and deepening crisis now for a long time, and our president doesn't do what a president needs to do.
And listen, the biggest concern, the biggest near-term concern right now is not just the ongoing war in the Gaza Strip and not just the Palestinian people who continue to suffer on a daily basis, but there is a growing risk that Israel may be ready to move into southern Lebanon to take on Hezbollah. And because Hezbollah, of course, is a much, much more difficult enemy to fight than Hamas was in the Gaza Strip. Their defensive positions are substantially better. Their soldiers are more well trained. They got more experience. They are not captured inside of a fence, so it's not easy to isolate them. And of course, they have substantial missile capabilities that Hamas never had, and these are much better than just the really the unguided rockets that Hamas fired, which hardly any of them actually struck any targets. These are much more capable to potentially overwhelm the Israeli Iron Dome, which worked really effectively in April when Iranian missiles and drones came in. Though, as we pointed out from Ted Postol when he was on back in a couple of months ago, he showed that was actually a warning sign that, hey, there is a real possibility that if Iran wanted to, they could have overwhelmed the Iron Dome system and hit lots of targets that could not have been protected. That was the signal back then. Now, if Hezbollah gets into war because Israel attacks into it, then the chance of Iran joining in with that become very high. And if that happens, first of all, there'll be lots of impetus and lots of demands among many in the West, especially the United States, that the U.S. should join with Israel like they did on April 13th, thinking, hey, it worked really well then. We'll just do it again. So they basically want to farm out the U.S. armed forces to Israel to fight that war. But here's the problem. You can do something that's overnight. You can take an action like we did there successfully if there's one shot. If there's one, series of waves of missiles, and then that's it. Then the situation's over. You can do it. If you get into a sustained operation, you can't do that. You're not going to be successful, especially if it's Iran and Hezbollah, because now then you're talking about rockets and missiles coming in from all different directions, which will definitely overwhelm the Israeli air defense systems. And all of a sudden, you could be talking about massive, massive damage to the Israeli infrastructure, to their population, which could potentially dwarf what happened on 10/7. And as we've talked about many times, America does not have the number of ammunition and missile interceptors to be able to sustain a long-term war there. And you see, we're already having trouble even getting weapons and those kind of interceptor ammunition to the Ukraine side. And you see how much trouble they're having to intercept the Russian missiles. If now all of a sudden we expend all of our interceptors down here, we'll run out for everyone. And that means us too. So really, every way you want to get into this, it is not in America's interest to let this war go on one day longer. We should, by all means, shut down the Israel-Hamas war, and we should shut down the Russia-Ukraine war. And we have the diplomatic power and the leverage to bring them both to an end. And we can do that. And let me just bluntly say, let me answer some of the criticism against that idea. It will be embarrassing for us. It will make us look weak. It will make us look bad. That's all true. You can't undo that at this point. We're already too deeply in. Those are sunk costs. So you can't undo. There's no solution. There is no solution where we don't come out looking bad. There is a solution where we come out, on the one hand, catastrophic, where things could continue to go so bad that we get seriously harmed and possibly dragged into one, maybe even two separate wars. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that we shut these wars down, suffer the embarrassment, but then stop the bleeding, keep all of our soldiers, all of our allies safe, and then we start the process of rebuilding for everything else and continuing to maintain our security and economic ability to prosper. That's the one path. And let me just point blank say, I don't care anyone takes offense at this or takes issue with this, because it is self-evidently true. If we did that and it ended the war but kept us all safe, that is absolutely the best course of action, as opposed to ignoring reality in Europe, ignoring reality in Middle East, and possibly getting sucked into a war, or even just continuing to muddle through here at the expense of the continuing the war, which will be a continual draining. We're already seen as being weak. We're already seen as being foolish in international relations. So again, you can't undo that, but you can stop the bleeding of that as well. And whether President Biden is going to do that, if he resigns and somebody else comes in, if they'll do that, if President Trump wins again and he comes in and he does that, honestly, at this point, I don't care. I just want somebody to do a damn good job. I want somebody to do something that's right, that makes sense, that's rational, that can be defended, and that will leave us in a stronger position. Because right now, as we're making this video today, on the 28th of June, 2024, everything good is possible. All the damage that's been done right now can be contained. If we fail to take advantage of the opportunity here, though, and continue to blunder forward, it's just impossible to see where this could go. It could go so many bad ways, and there may come a day when we would just die to have the opportunity that we have right here today to stop the bleeding. That's really the one thing I want to leave you with. If you don't take anything else from today, we need to stop the bleeding to give us a chance to start rebuilding strength and credibility, trust, all of those things, instead of continuing down a road which could end up in catastrophe. Couple of other things I want to talk to you about today, kind of a updated intel brief. Some things are from the legal world. That we had a U.S. Supreme Court decision that came down today regarding the January 6th issue with a lot of the people that were incarcerated, and there was a big ruling which could affect literally hundreds of people who have already been tried, many of whom are already in jail, and I think like up to 250 other people who are still in the process of their legal systems. This ruling just came down.
Do any of the rioters who are in jail today get released because of this?
They very well could be. There's two aspects to this. Some of them were convicted of what is now established to be improper charges. I mean, that hundreds of people were the subject of improper charges by the Justice Department. That includes President Trump, who has not been tried yet. They were also sentenced based on this conviction as well as a mix of other things. So those sentencing decisions now have to be reevaluated. I've said all along that I was surprised by how heavy the Department of Justice went on obstruction. I analogized it to someone going to Vegas and playing roulette but only betting red. Basically, the court just said, red's not a bet. So we've got to go back and look at all of these cases, not just for those who now have these convictions knocked out, but how they impact sentencing. For President Trump, this is a big day. Just knocked out hundreds of these convictions for January 6th. These citizens should not have been charged with this crime.
Now, here's the significance of that. It's not clear cut exactly what that's going to mean from the things that I've been reading so far. For example, even though that's been struck down, it will affect the charge against Trump related to January 6th, but it won't end things because he was charged with more than just that one charge there. So there's, I think, 4 different things he's been charged with. 2 of them are related to that, but 2 of them are separate. So those will be unaffected and will continue to go on. I've heard that the Trump lawyers are going to try to immediately get those counts at least thrown out quickly. Maybe they'll work, maybe they won't. I don't know, because a lot of it depends on the interpretation of the judge. Some of the other people, though, were charged with multiple things as well, and it may affect their sentencing, and it may not get them off. So it's not exactly like everybody gets to go free and everything is undone by this. It just means that they're on that particular case, and everyone who was only brought up on that charge, though, they could be let loose. So I think I saw the number shortly before we came on that 27 people are in jail right now, already convicted, serving their time based on that. And it's possible that they could all get a new trial, or they could even have the thing thrown out there. So we'll be keeping a sharp eye on that. But it's certainly a big issue right now because it looks like if Trump was complaining about the legal system that led to his conviction last month, he finally had something that worked out in his favor here. It's just might not be as big as some people are thinking, but it is certainly a big noteworthy event that we wanted to make you aware of. One last thing I want to show here is that we showed you at the beginning of the previous episode we had earlier today, really the worst situation that we had with the debate last night, where early in the debate, Biden was talking, was given an answer to something, and all of a sudden his answer started to go off. It wasn't making a lot of sense, and then all of a sudden he just locked up, and it was
making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the with the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
That was hard to watch there. And of course, as you've been seeing all over the internet, there's already the Democrat leaders themselves are just almost on fire. The Democratic outlets about how, oh my gosh, we may have to replace him on the ticket. That maybe he won't even be able to make it through the remainder of his term or whatever. We had a tweet actually that we put out in February of this year where we were concerned about this very outcome.
There is some movement, and I don't want to, well, maybe choose my words. There's some movement. There's been a response from there's been a response from the opposition, but yes, I'm sorry, from Hamas, but it seems to be a little over the top. We're not sure where it is. There's a continuing negotiation right now.
The worst thing that could happen is that nobody does anything. We continue to pretend everything's fine. Folks, it's not fine. I mean, you can see with your own eyes. You don't need my interpretation. You can see it. There is something that's not right. And the longer it goes, I mean, you've probably all seen people with dementia and have their capacities deteriorate over time. It doesn't reverse. It doesn't get better. And this is the most challenging position on the planet. There is no more stressful position than the president of the United States. Again, it doesn't matter whether you ever like or dislike somebody or what their policies are, but the man that has occupied that position, there is no greater stress and pressure on him than it can be imagined. And especially when you add on top of that the rigors of a presidential campaign, while you have to do with stuff like the Israeli-Hamas war or the Russia-Ukraine war, issues with China, all of those things on your head all at the same time, it's just an enormous strain on somebody. And somebody who's clearly having some cognitive issues, it's just going to make it worse. And I don't think that President Biden deserves that. And I hope that his team is going to recognize this and do what's best for him and what's best for the nation, because the status quo is just not sustainable for anyone. And now we saw that you couldn't hide it anymore. At the State of the Union address, which was after I'd made that video, all of a sudden he looked like everything was back to normal, like he was good. He was like on fire for the entire thing. He was like, in fact, he was condemned for yelling and screaming too much, like too much energy. He didn't have any of those moments. But it appears that it just was a flash in the pan, because we've had several videos even in the recent last 10 or so days where he's made, important statements that, you're like, is he going to fall asleep in the middle of his sentence? So this is continuing on. And now then on the most important stage of his entire presidency, you could argue, because everyone was already watching this debate to wonder was he going to be able to sustain himself? Was he going to be like he was in the State of the Union address, or is he going to be like he was in that clip that I showed? And that is going to weigh heavily on where the vote goes here. I can't even imagine with so many of the Democratic leaders saying all the things they said immediately last night and again earlier today about talking openly about exchanging him, taking him off the ballot. Many people already talking about the 25th Amendment, where the cabinet itself could replace him if he turns out to be incapacitated, that they're going to leave him on, because the chance of him winning, to my view, is gone. I mean, already Trump was ahead in many of the key battleground states even before this, but I just can't see how he's going to have any chance at all. And so I imagine something's going to change. But we still have to get through to January 20th of 2025. And there are all the pressures I talked about on him then, the pressures that I said that things are only going to get worse from last February. Now they are. And that also means, folks, that it's going to, as we go forward the rest of the summer and into the fall, it's also going to get worse. Those things just don't get better. And I'm not saying this to ding anybody. I'm not being disrespectful. I'm a Christian, and the Bible obligates us to pray for our leaders. Doesn't matter if you like them or not. We're told pray for your leaders so that things can be as peaceful as possible. And I take that to heart, and I literally do it every day. I pray for every president that we had, all of our leaders. I pray for them with sincerity. But we also have an obligation as stewards of our country and as citizens to be responsible. And our leaders have obligations to us. And if something happens that it's time to make a change, to make sure that we have somebody who's on his game at the top, when you're talking potential life and death issues, many of which we've talked about on this very episode, it's incredible pressure on anyone. But even if they're at the top of their game, but just imagine when they're not at the top of their game, and the consequence to all of us are enormous. And I also pray that our leaders will do what's right. And if they need some encouragement for some of our citizens, I hope that they'll be making that known. But it's very clear that the status quo is not going to be sustainable. We can't go through this, for another 6+ months till we get to the next administration. Something's going to have to change. And we'll be watching to see what it is. And we'll be bringing it to you. We'll be bringing you expert analysis from a lot of people who are well qualified to give that. I'll be giving you some of mine as we go through, because you can count on Daniel Davis Deep Dive to bring you the truth of what's going on, no matter what it happens to be, because we're unintimidated and uncompromised to continue to do that. As we close out today, it's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek thing. Jon Stewart last night, right after the debate was over, actually did a show on this, and he kind of gave some of the voice to some of the frustrations that many in America have, because we've been talking about Biden here, but neither one of the candidates were particularly inspiring, and both of them avoided a lot of the hard questions, and it's uncertain what they would do on many of the issues in there. And so I thought I would just kind of leave you with this at the end that, well, you'll see what you think about it.
Tonight's debate. Both of these men should be using performance-enhancing drugs. I'm sorry. Both. As much of it as they can get, as many times a day as their bodies will allow. If performance-enhancing drugs will improve their lucidity, their ability to solve problems, and in one of the candidates' cases, improve their truthfulness, morality, and malignant narcissism, then suppository away. Guess what, everybody? They should be taking whatever magical drugs can kick their brains into gear, because this ain't Olympic swimming. You know what I'm saying? Oh, he solved the Middle East, but he was doping, so it doesn't count. There's going to be an asterisk next to his presidency. And by the way, if those drugs don't exist, if there aren't actually performance-enhancing drugs for these candidates, I could sure use some recreational ones right now, because this cannot be real life. It just can't. Where